Buchanan is very fortunate to display our awareness of Domestic Violence Month in such a poignant way. Today, we are honored to have with us an acclaimed Hollywood female stunt driver who, around the age of 12, discovered her natural instinct for driving. By age 13, she accepted as her big brother a man who eventually became the head of the Rochester mob. While in high school, when most young girls are thinking of proms and school activities, our speaker was raped by her brother-in-law. By the age of 17, in spite of this secret, she became one of the most photographed girls in the country and was known as the Kodak Girl. Over the years, she was exposed to emotional and physical abuse, abduction, stalking, and violence. These acts consumed many years of her life. What does it take to wake up from such a destructive lifestyle? Today, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear a personal account of how one can and did escape. From the perils of abuse and violence, our speaker founded a successful stunt driving business, Performance 2. In a life that has taken many twists and turns, details are described page after page in her autobiography, The Company She Keeps. Today, please assist me in welcoming someone who has witnessed some of the worst life has to offer and successfully escaped it. We will be reminded by our speaker, and I quote, "Life is what it is. How we deal with it is what matters." Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker for the 2004 Combined IDS and Domestic Violence Awareness Luncheon is here to share with us her formula for dealing with life the only way she knows how, with determination and courage. I warmly present to you Miss Georgia Durante.
Wow. That was me you were talking about. This is such an honor to be here. When Pam Atherton called me and asked me if I would like to speak to this group today, I accepted, and she told me to get my tiara out because I was going to be treated like a queen. And today's experience on the base has just been phenomenal. I'm in awe. I'm just in awe. And I can't wait to see what the rest of the trip's going to be like. But, you know, it's like, what is a girl like me doing in a place like this? I don't know. I don't know how I got here. I really don't. But my life's experiences actually have brought me here. And I believe that it was God's will that I had lived my life the way I did, so that I could come out on this end helping other people and showing them the way. When my book came out, I was getting emails from all over the country, even from different countries, of women who had read the book, and they were reaching out to me and asking me for help, and some of them had been helped, and they had seen their lives. They saw themselves on the pages, and they made changes in their lives, and they emailed me and they thanked me, and I emailed every single person back. And whenever I do a radio show, I always give out my email address, and I get so many emails, and there's so many women out there that are hurting, and I just don't want to ignore anyone, because that could be the person that's going to kill herself. I had done a radio show, and I got an email from this one girl who said that she was going to kill herself that weekend. And she had found my book at the radio station and brought it home. She said, if I had not read this book, she said, I would have definitely killed myself this weekend. So I could see that my words were helping people, but I didn't write the book thinking that that was going to happen. In fact, what actually happened, how I ended up writing a book to begin with. I was doing a Bugle Boy Jeans commercial, and I had to do a 180 on a narrow mountain road. And the back tire caught the soft shoulder and flipped the car over an embankment. And I was heading towards a 300-foot drop-off into the ocean. As I'm somersaulting to my death, all I kept thinking about was, oh my God, I'm wrecking a $250,000 car. And as they're taking me to the hospital, I was okay, but I was laying there thinking, why was the car so important? Why wasn't my life important? And that really bothered me. And when I got home, I made an appointment with a therapist, and the therapist suggested that I get a journal and I write in it for 20 minutes a day. So I started to do that. And all this stuff started coming out that I had buried for so long that I had no idea was there. I had never really looked at my life before until I started doing this. I would reread the pages and say, oh my God, that's why I do this, or that's why I do that. And then after a while I started adding dialogue, and it turned into a book. I had no intention of writing a book. And then I was terrified when it came out. I said, oh my God, when people read what my life was all about, I'll probably never work again, you know? But it turned out to be quite the opposite. It opened doors to places like where I am right now. I've been speaking to women in prisons and kids on drugs, and my life's experiences has helped so many people to change their lives in a more positive way. But going back to what had happened to me, when I was 12 years old, I was brought up in Rochester, New York, and I started modeling for Eastman Kodak. And I looked a lot older for my age, and so going to school, I was always on television and in the newspapers, and you know, my classmates, I thought no one liked me, but they were jealous of me. I didn't realize that it was jealousy. So I started hanging out with people in the city, and these were guys who had shady backgrounds. And I ended up meeting Sammy G, who turned out to be the godfather of upstate New York. And I was in a restaurant with my girlfriend, and these two guys in their 20s started hitting on us very crudely. And Sammy took these two guys outside and just beat the living heck out of them. And I remember standing at that big picture window and saying, wow, somebody's doing that for my honor. I was 13. I was very impressed by that. And when I was 16, I started to get into these clubs. And the drinking age back then was 18. But I looked older, and Sammy would just, you know, nod to the bouncer and say it's okay. And he sort of watched me. He was like a big brother, so he would keep the guys at bay. And at 17, I was raped by my brother-in-law, and I was a virgin. And I believe that was the thing in my life. It was the reason why I took a lot of the roads that I did, and they were not good roads. They were bad roads. But I felt accepted by those people. I didn't feel accepted. I lost all my self-esteem. I didn't believe in who I was. If people told me I was pretty, I didn't believe it. And then Sammy had found out about the rape, and he called me in for a meeting, and he wanted to have the rapist killed. And I'll never forget it. I was 17 years old, and all I had to do was say yes, and it would have been done. And I, of course, resisted that, and I moved to New York City. Got a job in an after-hour club, mainly because it was exciting, not because I really needed the money, but there I was. I was around all these characters that I had just left in upstate New York. It was a wise guy hangout. And I had set a drink down in front of a guy, and I hadn't even backed away yet. He pulled out a gun, and he shot the guy next to him. He falls off the bar stool. Everybody scattered the place, and the owner of the place threw me the car keys, and he said, Georgie girl, run down, get the car, pull it up. So I ran down 2 flights of stairs. They got his body down the stairs, threw him in the back seat, and I drove him to Bellevue Hospital. And we pulled up in front of the emergency room. They pulled his body out, left it on the sidewalk. We beeped the horn, and we took off. And all they talked about was, man, Georgie girl, can you drive a car? I had no idea how I got there. This other person just kind of took over. And that's all they talked about for 2 months, is how I drove the car. They could care less whether this guy lived or died. And so it was about 2 months later, Sammy G asked me to deliver a message for him. And who I turned out delivering the message to was Carlo Gambino, who at the time was the boss of bosses. And when I was introduced to him, his eyebrow went up and he realized who I was because he had heard the talk about my driving. And that was really the beginning of it. It started out fairly innocently. I mean, I knew there was shady stuff going on, but I would pick up packages and I would drop them off at JFK Airport, which, you know, there were millions of dollars in these packages, and the money was being laundered in foreign countries. And then they started asking me to take them on what they called pickups. And what I assumed they were doing was breaking legs or doing whatever they do to get their vig, and I would wait around the corner from them. And they came out one day with their guns out, flung open the doors, jumped in the car, and said, "Step on it." And then I heard the sirens in the background, and I knew that I had to create distance between us and those cops because these guys were ready to shoot to kill. Now I realize what's going on and how deep I'm getting in, but you don't say no to these guys easily. So I end up marrying a guy in this world, and he was extremely abusive. But it wasn't until after we got married that I became his prisoner. And little by little, he started taking me away from my family, my friends. I couldn't work out of town. I had to answer to him. I'd go to the store if I was gone for 15 minutes and I should have only been gone 10 minutes. He would beat me up. I was afraid to tell my parents what was going on because I knew that he would isolate me from them even more. At the time, this was back in the early 70s, if you went to a therapist, you know, you were thought to be crazy. I went to my priest, talked about it with my priest. They urged me to stay. The police, they were always for the guy. So even if you called the police, you weren't assured of being protected. And at the time this was all going on with me, my husband had put a gun to my head with one bullet in it, and he pulled the trigger twice. And the fear that happens, a psychological thing that takes place in your head, you actually think that you're in love with this person because they're allowing you to live. At the time, Patty Hearst was robbing banks, and we would see her on TV, and we'd say, "Oh, she went to the other side." And there was a name for it, but I didn't know there was a name for it. But I knew in my heart and my head what was going on. She was being brainwashed, and it was the same thing that was happening to me. And you know, there were no places you could go. There were no safe houses. There were no books. You couldn't really talk to it with anybody. It was embarrassing. And I am so proud of what the military is doing. They're really taking a stance on this, and they're putting together groups that there's such a need for it. And I think the military you probably have a lot more of the problems than they do on the streets because of the stress involved. And I really applaud you for that. But how I ended up getting out is a mob war had broken out, and they were killing everybody who knew anything, and it really wasn't what I know. It's what they thought I might know. So I ended up fleeing to California. I had my 7-year-old daughter. I had $7 in my pocket, and my husband had taken all my credit cards, and I ended up living in the car and stealing food in convenience stores. And I finally found a friend that I used to model with in New York, and he was very courageous to let me stay with him because he knew my husband, and he knew it would happen to him if he'd found out. But while I'm holed up in this little studio apartment, I'm watching all these car commercials, and I couldn't really model because they'd figure out where I was and they'd know where to start looking for me. So I realized that you could never see the driver behind the wheel. And then I realized how many car commercials there are. Every other commercial is a car commercial. I said, this is perfect. I could do this. But this was 25 years ago. They were putting wigs on guys. Women just weren't doing that kind of thing. So I would just show up on the sets where I knew they were shooting car commercials, and I would bug these directors until finally one of them, just to get me out of his hair, hired me. And then they saw I could drive. And before I knew it, I was turning down more work than I could take. There was only one of me. said, God, if I could just clone myself, I could be a millionaire. But I had to wait until everybody was killed off. That took about 4 years. And then I came out and I formed my own company called Performance 2, and I went after people like Dar Robinson, who at the time was he was the most famous stuntman in the world. He's since been killed doing a stunt. Bobby Unser Jr. started out with me. So I came out of the gate with really good people, and everybody in that world took notice, and it took off. And we are now, every time you see a car commercial, there's only 3 companies that do what we do, and it's usually one of our companies and one of our people. There's only like a handful of drivers that do this. So anyway, just I'm on location. I'm actually writing my book on 3 Chevrolet tours that I had between takes. So I actually got paid to write my book, but I was really terrified to have it come out. But I'm so happy that it's been received the way it has, and it's not only turned other people's lives around, it's turned my life around, and it's so wonderful to be able to touch people and help them and show them the way. We have a thing tomorrow where we're going to be speaking to some girls at a shelter, and that one-on-one thing to me is so important, because I really can reach them. And I just thank you, Pam, for this opportunity, and thank the military for letting me come in and speak. And again, I applaud you for what you're doing. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We did build some time into our program for questions that you might have for Ms. Durante, so we do have a few more minutes if you'd like to launch any further.
I thought I was under pressure with the way how you guys are with the time around here. At 11:23, we're going to do this. I'm sure there's questions out there. I don't know if anybody here has actually had domestic violence in their life. Go ahead, honey.
Could you share some advice on how you can help build people's self-esteem? I think that's a critical part for you.
Yes, well, how I really built my self-esteem was getting away from my abuser. You need to be away, because when you're in it, you cannot see what is going on with you. And when you're away from it, you will see that people will pat you on the back for the good things that you do, and you'll start feeling more confident in who you are. Because when you're with them, they tell you that you're ugly. My husband used to say, "Where are you going?" Especially with a kid, And they have you so beaten down mentally that you can't get out. You truly believe that you are what they say you are. So when you get away from the abuser, you start building up your self-esteem, and you start believing in yourself. And when you start believing in yourself, that's when your life is going to change.
More often than not, women have a tendency of continuing that same pattern. What advice can we give those women to not look for the abusive man or keep getting into those same relationships?
That's something that is a very difficult thing to do, because it stems back to when I talk to a lot of these women, it goes back to their childhoods, their parents, their father beat up their mother, and it's a pattern, and they think that that's the way it's supposed to be. They have to get to a point in their life, and nobody can show them how to do that. Nobody can tell them how to do that. They just have to reach that point. But by having groups like you're putting together, where they have an awareness, I never had the awareness of what was going on with me. And they're in groups of other women that have the same thing going on with them, and they can all talk about it and share it. And then they begin to see. But it's nothing that you can tell them. In their own time, they have to see it.
In reading your bio, I read the part about your daughter when you were concerned about her. I think she was about 7 years old. Could you just share that with the group when you realized how sad she was?
Well, that was the thing that really I had, when I first fled to California, I skipped over it a little bit, but I was in hiding with my husband, who became so abusive at that point, and you know, I couldn't tell anybody where we were from, what we did, what our real names were. So I was a real prisoner, and I was excluded, you know, from the rest of the world. When I would go to the pool, I would have to wear my sunglasses so that I didn't make eye contact with anybody, because people just naturally want to talk and say, you know, who are you, where are you from, what do you do? So I would spend many nights on the beach with my daughter, freezing, running out of the house because my husband would become violent, and that was my escape, and I had nowhere to go. Or if I was lucky enough to get out with my purse, I would go into the local theater and sit there for hours and hours watching the same movie over and over again, afraid to go home. And one day, I went to the pool with my daughter, and I heard her laughing, and she was playing with these two little girls, and she was having fun, and I realized I had not heard her laugh. And then the father came, and he started playing with his daughters and totally ignored her. And she sat on the edge of the pool, and she just looked at him, and I still see this face, like, won't you play with me too? And it was the first time I had seen her pain, because I was so wrapped up in my own that I hadn't seen hers. And that was the thing that just, I mean, I should have really planned it, but I didn't. I just got up, I took her by the hand, went back to the condo, and my husband was playing tennis, and I could see him below, so I knew where he was. And I had enough time to just throw some stuff in the car, and I just started driving. I had no idea where I was going, and I ended up in Hollywood. I could see the Hollywood sign. It was 5 o'clock traffic, and I stopped to get some gas, or stopped to get her a hamburger, and I opened my wallet and realized I only had $7. And I was looking around at all the people in the cars, and it's like they all had a home, they had a place to go to. I didn't know where I was going to go, what I was going to do. Then I met a guy who said he was going to help me, and he turns out to be a stalker who kidnapped my daughter. And I mean, it was like I was attracting all of these nuts in my life, and it was a real concentrated period. You know, how I got through all of that was just amazing. But I did, and that's the inspirational part of my life story, is that you can do it. You know, you've got to have the will, and you've got to, first of all, believe in yourself. You know, when you do that, you can make it happen. Anybody else? Go ahead.
What do we think is the most important message we can give young girls today, preteen, teenager age range?
Well, the gals that I'm going to speak with tomorrow are younger. Is this the school we're going to tomorrow?
School, yeah, they're high school.
Yeah. I have a list of things that they can look at to know whether they are in an abusive relationship or not. And any one of those things, if they happen to you, you will know that you're in an abusive relationship. And it's the awareness. You know, you've got to make them aware of how it starts. And if they're aware, then they can look for it.
If we become aware, perhaps of a neighbor or something, it's not in our own home, what would you recommend that would support that woman or that man?
I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, if we're witnessing something, maybe from a distance, or we have a suspicion
Of a friend?
we don't know for sure, how should we approach?
I mean, if this is happening to you yourself, or if it's happening to a friend.
It's happening to someone else.
You need to verbalize. You need to tell this person. Do not be afraid to tell this person what you are seeing. And they're not going to like it because they're in denial still. But if enough people tell them that, they'll begin to open their eyes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, I'm not, this is, this can sometimes be difficult for me because I am not an expert on this. I'm not a doctor. I can only give my life's experiences and how I dealt with it, and hope that whoever is in the situation can pull from that strength, whatever it is. But, I hate to give these women advice because it may be the wrong advice for them. It could have been the right advice for me, but maybe not for them. And it's just educating yourself. There's so many books on the subject now.
One of the things that you did was you separated yourself into two different parts. And that seems to be a very common thing with people that are dealing with abuse. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, in my book, when I was writing it, I was noticing that when I would read the pages, I couldn't even believe that I wrote that. It was another person talking. It was definitely another personality. And when I started to examine what had happened to me, I really did have like a split person there. I call it Georgia White and Georgia Black, and I believe that Georgia Black was born the night of the rape. And Georgia Black was not a bad person, but Georgia White was the innocent, sweet side of me that couldn't cope with trauma. Georgia Black just kind of took over when something like that happened and did what needed to be done, and watched out for Georgia White. And this is very common. Everybody has these two sides to them, but it gets more pronounced the more trauma you have in your life. The more pronounced it gets. And in fact, when I had my editor at the publishing company was going over the book and wanted to take Georgia White and Georgia Black out, she said, "This is way too confusing." She said, "This just isn't done. We have to take this out." And I refused to do that. And as it turned out, that is the thing that most people relate to, because we all have it. I know you have a question, Colonel.
Well, I don't think I've ever really seen somebody turn the table so effectively. Actually I did, and my question is, I guess it's kind of a softball, a little off the subject, but I asked her to come back, and I'm trying to bribe her a little bit by promising a high-speed taxi ride. I'm just afraid that won't be quite as exciting as the professional driving that you do.
I don't know about that.
Well, I'm just wondering, do you still drive actively in these kinds of?
Well, I do. I had an operation on my neck recently. I got into an accident on the set with Bobby Unser Jr., a 70-mile-an-hour hit, and I ended up with a neck operation, so I'm kind of recovering from that. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do the crash and burn stuff anymore, but hopefully I'll get back to at least the precision end of it. But I still coordinate, and I'm very much involved with booking the drivers and going out on the sets. And so, but I think a ride in an F-16 is going to be a lot better than that. And I will definitely come back for that. Anyone else?
I have a question, maybe. I know you had noted about the one young lady who said that she wanted to die basically by reading your book, that she gave her the will to live. What was it about you that maybe at some point you did think about taking your life, but what do you think is about you that gave you that will to live?
I've always been this real adventurous kid, and I always felt like there was always something more out there. It was always just out of my reach. So I was always reaching for it. I knew it was there. And I've had an angel on my shoulder all my life. And I always believed in God, but I wasn't walking the walk. And it wasn't until after the book came out that I really gave myself completely over. And my life has just been wonderful ever since. And prior to that, it was a mask I was wearing. I was always the life of the party. I was always laughing, and nobody ever knew. Nobody ever knew. But I wasn't happy inside, and today I am. Did I answer your question? Okay. I sometimes get off on tangents.
Let's give her a hand this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Durante. We would like to present you this morning or this afternoon with a very special token of our appreciation. If you'd please come back and kind of pose if you'll join.
Another surprise. By the way, when Pam told me to get my tiara out, it was right at my bedside.
This is just to show the audience here a book about our culture. New Mexico says the distant land. We're known as the land of enchantment around here. So we just want to present you with this. And if you notice on the inside, Colonel Posner's already signed it.
Oh,
as well
God,
as
is
some of our
that
other
great?
members.
Could you read that? Because I don't have my glasses on.
Sir, would you like to read this?
It's just a real small sentiment. I just said, on behalf of the Cannon Air Force Base Family Support Organizations, IDS, Family Advocacy, and the like, thanks for your participation and contributions to their mission. Signed today at Cannon Air Force Base.